polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. Clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon.
Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A surprise trip to Belfast. Might the Prime Minister have something up his sleeve in terms of finally solving this seemingly intractable Northern Ireland Protocol issue? We'll try and make sense of that today. Also, Liz Truss has been in Japan. What's she been saying about the rise of China? Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has been in Ukraine, and strikes in Germany have stopped him from getting across to the Munich Security Conference. We'll also be discussing how Labour might be handling all of the above. That to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is holding talks with Stormont leaders amid speculation a deal could be close over the Brexit protocol. Rishi Sunak, along with the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, are meeting politicians in an effort to reassure the DUP about the Prime Minister's hopes to overcome problems with the protocol. He hopes a deal between the EU and the UK can be agreed within days over the post-Brexit trading arrangements. The SNP's postponed a conference on independence following the resignation of First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. It comes as the party's executive committee says a ballot to select the new party leader will close on the 27th of March. Deputy First Minister John Swinney has already announced he will not be entering the race. The Scottish Government's offered healthcare staff an average 6.5% pay rise. Workers would also receive a one-off payment of between around £400 and £900, depending on seniority. Matt McLaughlin, Unison's Scotland Head of Health, has called it a credible pay offer that needs serious consideration. And the Scottish Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, says the deal would make nurses, midwives and paramedics by far the best paid anywhere in the UK. UK retailers recorded an unexpected rise in sales last month, despite the cost of living crisis. The Office for Statistics says retail sales volumes rose by 0.5% in January, following a fall of 1.2% in December. The rise in sales mainly thanks to cheaper fuel and January discounts. Food store sales, however, fell because of rising food prices. Liz Truss has called on G7 leaders to agree a package of sanctions against China if ongoing tension over Taiwan escalates. Speaking in Japan, the former Prime Minister has called for a coordinated response and has urged the West to take a tougher approach to Beijing. Truss has called for the creation of a Pacific Defence Alliance in cooperation with NATO to support Taiwan. It is her first public speech since resigning as Prime Minister. TV online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, Rishi Sunak is in Belfast this morning, surprising us all by flying there last night. This is all, of course, amid speculation that a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol could be agreed within days. The Prime Minister will meet with party leaders in Belfast for talks before joining up with the Foreign Secretary to speak to EU leaders. That's across at the Munich Security Conference on Saturday and Sunday. If Sunak wins the support of the DUP, a fresh deal could be presented to Cabinet next week and then set out in the Commons as early as Tuesday. But is this really the light at the end of the tunnel? Is this putting behind all of these protracted Brexit arguments to bed, finally, years after the referendum and the series of deals we've already made? Or is that all a little too hopeful? Well, let's get the very latest now from our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, was this a surprise to see the Prime Minister fly across to Belfast late last night?
Well, we knew it was coming at some time along the line. We knew it was coming this week. Earlier on, the Taoiseach, or the Taoiseach in the Republic, did his round of interviews. The players had basically taken to the pitch, and he was saying, well, that this deal had so much effort put into this deal that really this was the last chance. This was it. It was all over if this deal wasn't taken. But none of us really know what this deal is yet. The parties arrived here this morning. The Alliance Party were the first in. Naomi Long came to the microphones beside us here, and she said, well, she hadn't been briefed on the deal, but yeah, the deal was nearly done. So what that means entirely, who knows? The SDLP are just on their way out now, and the Ulster Unionist Party, the smaller Unionist Party, have now entered the building behind us. So everything here is concentrating, as you've alluded to the DUP.
Is this sequential then? They're going in one by one to see the Prime Minister, who will then sort of try and sell them on his vision. And we understand this is something to do with green lanes and red lanes, goods that go to Northern Ireland no longer having to be checked. We don't know the full details, but this is a salesman's job from the Prime Minister now.
Oh, it totally is. And I mean, what they're trying to do is say the goods that come into Northern Ireland from the UK will stay inside Northern Ireland and there'll not be checks put on them. But the paperwork will still be there. That's one of the things we don't know about the deal. If the paperwork's gone, well, that is a movement forward, because that paperwork through those TSS checks were costing about £318 million last year alone. So that is an expense that most companies don't want to deal with Northern Ireland because of that type of stuff. But the European Courts of Justice and issues around that will be the biggest point here for unionism. Can they move within that divergence or not? Because, of course, when there's divergence on one side, then the European Courts of Justice will sit over what exactly Northern Ireland can do. And, of course, laws are set in Europe and made in Europe. And, of course, Northern Ireland has no MEPs. So the only MEPs they have on the island of Ireland will be in the Republic of Ireland, which is outside the UK. And then starts the row of the Constitution of Northern Ireland. So this is quite a deal that Rishi Sunak has got to sell, and he's got to walk that line with the DUP and the Unionists to make sure that the Constitution of Northern Ireland is not handed straight over to Europe.
And it's hard to overestimate how long this has been in the making. Boris Johnson first tasked Lord Frost with getting this deal. He, of course, resigned from Cabinet. Liz Truss then took on the responsibility as her role as Foreign Secretary. She met, of course, many times with Maros Sefcovic, the negotiator of the EU. And then the task passed to James Cleverly, the current Foreign Secretary. This has been a many months, dare I say years-long process. Could it really end this coming week?
Well, it'll not end this week because this is all about political credibility. And of course, unionists were promised, as you went through the many people that have dealt with this, that Article 16 would be triggered if they weren't happy, that a new deal was on the table, that legislation would be put through the House of Commons to override any Brexit deals that were there. None of that came, and the unionists eventually walked out of government on the Good Friday Agreement in Stormont, and that government has been down since then. So everything has been direct rule, if you like, from Westminster, and that played out this week when a young Dahi McGowan was looking for transplant laws to be passed so as he could have a heart transplant, and his family had took it there. Of course, Stormont wasn't up and running again, and that will be put through Westminster. So even if this deal was lock solid and gold, unionists will not go in until it has been ratified by Europe, it has been put through the House of Commons, and they know every single detail, because they will not trust to go back in again as it was, and that could take anything up to a year.
That is fascinating. Just finally, while we have you, Doogie, when are we expecting the DUP to meet the Prime Minister, and might they be making a statement after that meeting?
I think they probably will make a statement. They are due in round about 10:15. I've seen some of the members of the party starting to arrive just as we came on air. So the SDLP are now at the microphones to the left-hand side of me now. The Ulster Unionists will come out, then the DUP will go in, and then I believe last in will be Sinn Féin.
Well, 10:15 seems like that magic time then. We'll keep our eyes peeled closely to the goings-on there in Belfast. But for now, Doogie Beattie, thank you for joining us. Let's get some reaction to this now from the Conservative side of things. Matthew Robinson is the chairman of the Northern Ireland Conservatives. And Matthew, have you been speaking in your capacity leading the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland to people in Westminster about the progress? Because I do stress how long this process has been going on.
Well, we have a great team in the Northern Ireland office with Chris Eaton-Harris and Steve Baker, and we've had a series of conversations since they've been imposed over the course of the negotiations. We've always remained, from the Conservative standpoint in Northern Ireland, open-minded to the negotiations. Yes, we have some of the same concerns that unionism has broadly as it relates to the Northern Ireland Protocol. We're also pragmatic, and we need to get a deal over the line here. It's not good enough that Northern Ireland finds itself in a position where we keep trying to continue without functioning devolved government. We had it when Sinn Féin collapsed it not so long ago. We have it now with the DUP. We're running on autopilot here. It's not good for inward investment into Northern Ireland. It's not good for trade. It's not good for the Northern Irish economy. So we need to get to a point where we get a deal over the line, we get functioning devolved government. And I fear that the ask potentially on the DUP side is going to be too great. I think what we're hearing from the UK government, the type of deal that potentially they've locked in with the European Commission, a red lane, green lane proposal, could ease a lot of these checks, even potentially digitalising some of these checks, which, by the way, have long been advocated by the UK government. I can remember long ago in the European Parliament, dating back as 2017, there were very similar proposals made, and they were laughed out of the room by European bureaucrats. I'm relieved that our friends in Brussels are finally seeing the light with regards to the UK government's proposals. A little too late, but at least there's potentially a deal on the horizon. I guess the European Court of Justice and its relative jurisdiction in Northern Ireland could potentially be a bit of a wedge issue for unionism. DUP have on their rightward flank, they have the TUV and Jim Allister. They're going to be looking to the council elections in a matter of months, potentially another assembly election. So this is not easy, but we need a deal for Northern Ireland. It's not fair for the Northern Irish people that we can keep trying to walk on without functioning devolved government. We need governance in all that.
It is fascinating that some of the solutions that are being reportedly discussed here that look like they make up the shape of this potential deal are solutions that the EU batted out of hand several years ago. It's almost like this was always possible, and there was a lot of politics at play here. Is it your assessment that the European Union simply wanted to punish the United Kingdom? That punishment, they feel, now has been rather dealt with, and so we might well be entering a more rational phase of a relationship based off common interest rather than winners and losers?
I really hope so. I mean, I can remember years back, 2017, sitting in a Constitutional Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, and they invited a brilliant guy called Lars Carlson, who commissioned a report into customs checks and trade as it relates to the Northern Ireland issue. And a lot of those proposals, red lanes, green lanes, digitalizing some of these checks, were proposed. It was in writing. I can remember, and it was completely laughed out of the room by many on the EU side and Brussels. And of course, I think they were playing hardball purely for their own political reasons. I'm relieved that, credit to the European Commission, they've finally come to, I think, a more rational phase in the relationship with the United Kingdom. That's a good thing. The UK government deserves credit here that it's persevered in these negotiations. What Boris Johnson was able to secure, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, was a momentous free trade agreement, the biggest the EU's ever signed. The Northern Ireland Protocol was a pill that at the time was swallowed, that unionism didn't particularly like, but it got the deal over the line, and it got us to that free trade agreement. We're nearly there. I'm hopeful that that whatever the UK government, if there is a deal here, is enough to bring the Democratic Unionist Party back to the table. If it's not, there's a host of options at that point. We have always called for Northern Ireland reverting back to a voluntary coalition setup where we have a mandatory coalition arrangement post the Good Friday Agreement that effectively gives largest designations in the unionist nationalist community vetoes. I would like to see a more normal functioning devolved where people on a voluntary basis can go into coalition together.
Well,
I think, but that is an entirely separate conversation to the protocol, but one that is going to linger in the mind, I think, of many, both in the British and Irish government.
Well, we will listen with close intent to what the DUP have to say, if they say anything at all, later this afternoon, or perhaps even this morning after they meet the Prime Minister. But for now, Matthew Robinson, Chairman of the Northern Ireland Conservatives, thanks for joining us on The Briefing. Now, moving on, while Rishi is in Belfast and Keir Starmer has been in Ukraine, Liz Truss has been in Japan. It's turning to be a recess fraught with travel. Yes, the former Prime Minister has been addressing an international conference in Tokyo, saying that the free world is in danger from an increasingly authoritarian and belligerent China. Truss advocates the construction of a, quote, Pacific Defence Alliance in cooperation with NATO. She's been warning the Western world to not make the same mistake with China that we made over Putin, to recognise aggression early on and to take steps to stop it before it's too late. Well, let's get more on this now with Cindy Yu, the assistant editor of The Spectator. And Cindy, Liz Truss has obviously been rather hawkish on China, particularly from her time as Foreign Secretary and her brief stint as Prime Minister. This is clearly something she feels very strongly about. Do you think the Western world is listening?
Well, I think that a lot of the Western world does agree with her that we do need to be more hardline on China. And you see that under President Biden, that actually he hasn't changed much of the American approach to China since Donald Trump left. So he's actually kept a lot of it, but just made it slightly more palatable to his Western allies like London and in the EU as well. As to Liz Truss herself, though, I feel that, with the amount of interventions that she's making since leaving office, every new intervention has, less marginal effect. And it actually does, I'm not sure anyone finds her particularly influential when you're talking about the world's capitals.
It is interesting because this is the first major speech she's given. Of course, she's written that article in the Sunday Telegraph. She's given an interview with The Spectator. But this is the first sort of big international intervention she's made on an area. And it's interesting that it's not domestic policy. This is foreign policy. And she's on the billing of this conference in Tokyo, along with some other former prime ministers. The former Prime Minister of Australia, the former Prime Minister of Belgium as well. Speaking alongside Guy Verhofstadt, which some viewers may well remember is one of those big Euro-federalist Brexit battlers. It's interesting to see them aligned on this issue.
Unlikely bedfellows, and I think Liz Truss recognised that herself. You know, there was a bit of banter when she was doing her speech, you know, saying, Guy, I'm looking at you, when she's talking about the EU's economic might and using that to counter China as well. And I think that just goes to show how China has become a cross-party, cross-issue topic for a lot of Western politicians, that no matter if you're on the left or the right, you know, people believe in standing up to China much more. I think where people disagree on is just how to do that. But Liz Truss, you know, it is interesting that she's making a foreign policy intervention because she clearly does really care about it personally, not like perhaps Rishi Sunak, who will say things on it if he has to, but is clearly not one of his hobby horses, whereas for Liz Truss, she does feel this very, very strongly.
And just finally, looking at where Rishi Sunak is now on this issue, on the whole issue of whether or not China should be deemed a threat to the United Kingdom. He said it should be deemed a threat in the leadership campaign, but now his government is using the words a systemic challenge. Why the watering down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this all comes from Americans, the American side, I think, for Rishi Sunak, which is that Joe Biden has really refrained from using the word threat to describe China. He describes Russia as a threat, but not China as a threat. And Rishi, as this kind of California born-again, banker born-again politician, I think really is following DC's lead on this one. So he doesn't want to step out of line to what the leader of the free world is essentially saying. And during the leadership, you know, he was campaigning against Liz Truss and he was trying to kind of out-hawk Liz Truss, which was never going to be a good strategy because he can't out-hawk Liz Truss, as we've talked about. You know, she does feel this very, very strongly. So now he's had to row back and actually kind of do what he actually believes in. The question is, will the Conservative Party allow him to do that, or will they kick up about it?
And of course, we've got this integrated defence review expected in the next month or so, where we might see some more answers to these questions. But for now, Cindy Yu, assistant editor of The Spectator, thanks for joining us on the briefing. Really, really interesting discussion there. Now, back to Scotland, where the First Minister could, or the departure of the First Minister, I should say, could herald in a new era for the Labour Party, a party that dominated Scotland for decades, but was reduced to just one seat in 2015. So might the fall of Sturgeon now offer Labour the chance to retake many of their old heartlands? Might this move by Sturgeon shorten that path for Keir Starmer to number 10? Well, let's speak to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, who's at a Scottish Labour Party conference today. Tony, what's the mood there?
Good morning, Tom. Well, I must say, as you can probably hear behind me, quite a lot of jubilant people tantalisingly drooling at the possibility of what the next political chapter for Scotland could look like. As you keenly pointed out, Labour have really fallen away after dominating the first few years of devolution here. And what we can see this weekend is that Labour are pulling out all the stops to convince their delegation that now is the time. And certainly this does seem like a political, a perfect storm politically for Scottish Labour. Sturgeon's exit means that for the time being, at the very least, SNP supporters are going to be wondering what comes next. And of course in Westminster, a very different tale from the last time we all went to the polls in a general election. Speaking to some of the delegates here today, the mood is certainly positive. You know, people are excited about where to go. People are excited today to hear from Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie and Anis Sarwar, who will be paving the way for a special visit from Keir Starmer on Sunday. So what we know at this moment in time is certainly that Scottish politics is looking like it's anybody's game at the minute. And certainly Scottish Labour have the form up north of the border. whereas the Scottish Conservatives, well, they would have quite a lot more ground to gain. So it'll be a very interesting weekend to talk about things like the struggling healthcare system and, of course, the cost of living crisis, which has quickly become everybody's enemy number one at either side of the aisles.
Yes, I suppose when the big sort of shine and media acceptability of Nicola Sturgeon is gone, not only is there a power vacuum, but potentially a greater focus on the many problems that Scotland is facing and has faced under SNP leadership for so long. Well, Tony Maguire, thank you for joining us there live from Edinburgh, where the Labour Party is holding their Scottish conference. Now, finally today, the latest GB News People's Poll results are in, and the country seems to think that Labour is the party to form the next election, ahead of the Conservatives by a monumental degree, the Conservatives flatlining for many, many months. But also on other issues, should the government reduce or increase tax levels? Well, our poll shows that nearly a third of the country want the government to reduce the tax burden. 14% think it's about right, while 16% would like taxes increased. Unusual. Well, let's talk now to our head of digital news, Dan Falvey, and see what you make of this, Dan, because I suppose it's interesting to see, particularly on that question of tax, more people want it reduced than not, but that doesn't seem where politicians are.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting, actually, is when you really delve down to these, below the headline figures, is what voters from different political parties think. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, 38% of Conservative voters say that taxes need to be reduced, and that's kind of what we'd expect. There's a lot of anger amongst grassroots Tories that, quite frankly, this isn't what they think their party should stand for. But what we've seen is Keir Starmer's talking about maybe he would go for tax cuts as well. But when we look at what Labour voters think, maybe surprisingly 38% say that taxes should be increased. Wow. To an even higher rate, which, given that we're currently at the highest tax burden in half a century, is really quite something.
That is extraordinary, because we do talk so much about how taxes have gone up and up and up, the burden being so heavy now on individuals at a time of cost of living squeeze as well. I wonder, would Keir Starmer be chasing after his own voters, or might he, as he's done on other issues, be willing to sort of speak out against the backbenchers of his own party?
I think what we've seen from Keir Starmer in the past is that he's very happy to go and park his tanks on Tory lawns with this and say, actually, we think there need to be tax cuts for working people. He keeps talking about taxing big business more, but he says for ordinary working people, quite frankly, we need to reduce this. He sees that this is there to be won for Labour and that he can really go and seize those votes.
Well, I suppose the problem is when you tax big businesses put their prices up for ordinary working people. It all folds back. Just on the issue of where the votes are in terms of the distribution in the country, the Tories have not had a bounce at all. These are still the levels they have been on for months. Do you think MPs will be surprised that their gambit to chuck out Liz Truss, get in Rishi Sunak, it doesn't seem to be paying dividends yet?
Yeah, and I think what the worry is, of course, we're ticking closer and closer towards the general election. Everyone didn't expect this to change overnight. I think the Conservatives were willing to say, look, this is going to take time. But as these polls continue to come in and they continue to show absolutely no change for the Conservative Party, they'll be thinking, hang on a minute, this is going badly wrong here. We need to do far more than we currently are. And maybe actually this new approach isn't working either. We need, maybe to go for a bit more like a Liz Truss-style policy, just without Liz Truss.
Gosh, well, yet more upheaval potentially within the Conservative Party. That's a prospect to potentially fear or maybe get excited by. Dan Falvey, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. That's it. That's all we have today. But coming up, it's Esther and Phil who'll be talking through more of these big questions and particularly looking at that crucial time of 10:15 when the DUP meet the Prime Minister. Stick around.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview channel 236.
And YouView channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
You're watching and listening to GB News. This is Friday morning with Esther and Phil.
And we've got a